Welcome to another Q&A episode. Today I'm going to be answering your fitness and health related questions that you submitted via YouTube and Instagram. Let's get right into it. I had a great question in, which is how to balance a physical job and daily exercise and rest. Now, I struggle with this a bit, but I can sympathize even more with people like builders, landscapers, gardeners, anyone that basically does a physical repetitive movement. Often they'll be quite strong but out of shape. Obviously that's a big generalization, but these people that work very manual jobs can get home so exhausted that they've got no energy reserves left to plan a healthy meal. It doesn't say they can't do it, but if you just get home from work and you're gonna go with what feels natural and you're so exhausted, you often just revert to whatever the easiest option is. So something quick and easy to eat, which is often just high calorie density, not great for you. And they might also lack structured exercise, which is gonna build them up. They do a lot of what I call junk volume. So my recommendation would be minimize your junk volume when you're training. So junk volume would be basically any sets done or any exercises that aren't at your working weight or at your working intensity level. So it's okay to warm up, but I often see people over warming up. So they do too many warm-up sets and they do too many reps in their warm-up sets. So if I'm gonna do a incline dumbbell bench press, a lot of people will do a set of 12, almost to failure, then they'll do a set of 10, and then they might get to their sets of 8. But there's too much volume prior to your actual working weight, which is gonna make you stronger. So I'd recommend more like doing your first set, maybe a set of 6, next set, even just doing 3 to 5, and then you get straight into your sets of 8, let's say, if that's what you're working on. So you're doing less reps, and I wouldn't even call them warm-up sets. I call them bridging sets because they're bridging you from nothing, getting you up to your working weight without it being a shock straight away. So minimize that junk volume. Keep your workouts relatively short but efficient, probably more like 30 to 50 minutes. You don't want to be in the gym too long because you're probably already exhausted and you're just gonna be wasting your time. And then as far as recovery goes, focusing on sleep, but rather than just focusing on the amount of sleep, I'd focus more on your consistency. So having a consistent sleep time and wake time, even if you're only getting 6.5, 7 hours, let's say you're really busy, if they're quality hours using the same circadian rhythm to get them, you can get better recovery probably from less hours than someone that's throwing their sleep pattern all over the place, but actually being in bed longer. And the other one is more planning with nutrition. Don't just leave it to motivation. Motivation is probably not going to be there at the end of a long working week. So you're going to have to pre-plan your nutrition. I don't mean that you have to do loads of batch cooking and box things up. That might not be realistic, but at least plan what you're going to have for tea. Maybe do an online shop and get everything in the fridge at the start of the week, or plan where you're going to get lunch from in advance of you starting your working day. Another interesting question we had in was any tips or types of workout for someone that's skinny fat. So I'd say skinny fat is basically someone with a moderately low or healthy body weight, but they've actually got low muscle mass and therefore a relatively high body fat percentage. So they might not even have that much body fat, but if you've got a healthy weight but no muscle mass, well, the percentage of you that's fat is going to be too high. So what I'd say for that is you don't necessarily need to be in a large calorie deficit. So I'd go more for calorie maintenance. So you're eating about the same amount of calories as you burn each day, and you're going to go for body recomposition. So you're going to basically try and gain muscle and gradually lose some of that fat. And you might even be in a slight calorie surplus and you'll go up in weight slightly. But you don't want to do that too fast because you'll just end up gaining more fat. So as far as types of workout, I recommend weight training or at least equipped calisthenics. So if you're going to do calisthenics, maybe with rings or a pull-up bar, as well as the body weight stuff, will be good for actually gaining some muscle mass. It can be done without, but if you want optimal, I'd probably use some equipment. And ideally, you'd probably use some dumbbells and a bench. Working within hypertrophy rep ranges, so around 40 seconds of time under tension, Very vaguely, it's going to be somewhere between like 8 and 15 reps, but it will depend a little bit on the exercise. And high protein diet, obviously, and that's about it really. So do some weight training, keep your protein high, and either do calorie maintenance or a very small calorie surplus. That leads me on a little bit onto the next question, which is what low budget equipment can be helpful for increasing muscle mass and performance in calisthenics? So the three I mentioned there are the three I'd recommend. For building muscle mass, you can't really go wrong with an adjustable pair of dumbbells. You could get a set of lots of dumbbells, but it's going to be more expensive, but just a quality adjustable pair will cover all your bases. That's going to be good for muscle mass. And in terms of performance in calisthenics, I do recommend getting some rings and a pull-up bar. Now the 2 and 2 go together because you can put the rings on your pull-up bar. The rings will allow you to do deep, high range of motion press-ups, they'll allow you to do ring dips, even some chin-ups with a nice comfortable rotation, and the pull-up bar is going to be really good for building your back muscles and allow you to do some hanging knee raises to develop your abs really well. So 3 things: dumbbells, rings, bar. This next one, I can see where the confusion has been. There's been mixed signals on this in the fitness industry, but their question is losing fat really just about calories in versus calories out? And is my body changing its basal metabolic rate to adjust to the deficit? Yes, mathematically, it is just calories in versus calories out. So if you expend more calories than you intake, you will lose weight. But that as an answer to someone struggling is not going to be very helpful, because you need to find out a way of being in a calorie deficit sustainably, and just telling them they need to be is not really helpful. So society is not really set up for you to easily stay in a calorie deficit. A lot of the cheaper foods are very calorie dense. They mix sugars and fats together and salt, which makes it very addictive. Even the way petrol stations are laid out, you try to buy some petrol and then you're standing in a queue next to you and you've got all the chocolate. You might be on your way back from work, hungry, haven't had tea, and it's just tempting you. So being aware that your environment is not cultivated for you to succeed, and being a bit conscious of that is quite useful, because it means that you're not just going to fall for the traps sort of without thinking about it. So what I would recommend is you need to create an environment that allows you to be in a moderate calorie deficit. So you do need to create a calorie deficit, but your focus shouldn't just be on trying harder to not eat food. It should be on trying to cultivate an environment. That might mean the people that you're around. It might mean the not having unhealthy food in the house, having healthy shopping habits, walking to work regularly, something that increases your calorie expenditure on a daily basis. Don't rely on your motivation. Try and curate an environment that makes it possible for you to achieve your weight loss. Sticking on the theme of weight loss or fat loss, are cheat meals good or bad on a cut? I really don't like the cheat meal term or mindset. I think you need to be able to learn to eat what I'd call more indulgent food without the feelings of guilt associated with it. And it's essential to your long-term success, basically to learn to moderate that foods aren't good and bad. It's just that some foods are more calorie dense, maybe more indulgent than others. So they need to be had in a frequency and portion size that's appropriate to their calorie density. So learning to have some what you could call cheat meals, or at least cheat foods, I think is important, but I wouldn't just binge out and call it a cheat meal, because that means when you're low, anytime your motivation's not there, you're just going to revert to whatever you've been abstaining from. So it's okay to eat some more indulgent food, let's say some pizza, but rather than doing it like a cheat meal, I would actually just try and think, okay, we're gonna go out, we're gonna have a pizza, I'm gonna share it with my partner, so we're gonna have half a pizza, we'll skip the pudding and we'll have a decaf coffee afterwards. So I wouldn't call that a cheat meal, that's just you're learning to eat what would be considered more indulgent food in a healthy way. Because at the end of the week, it's your total calorie balance that matters. So if you're trying to create a small calorie deficit, it doesn't really matter what your daily average, what your daily amount is, it matters what your weekly average is. So if you go completely off the rails at the weekend, then your average calories per day is going to be too high. It's going to be in a surplus where you're not going to burn it off. So think about your week's calorie intake, not just each day. You can't just start again on a Monday. You've got the same body. So no, I'm not a fan of cheat meals. Learn to eat indulgent food without guilt. Next up, what equipment and supplements do I use most? Now, I use a pull-up bar a lot, so I've got one outside, I've got one in the gym here, and I've got one at my studio in Chester as well. And this is a really easy thing for me to tag on. I'll make sure I do at least 4 sets of pull-ups every week. And then the other things I really like to use would be dumbbells and adjustable bench. Again, I'll use those at home. When I go to a more commercial gym, I'm pretty much still mostly just using the adjustable bench and the dumbbells. So those 2 pieces of equipment with the dumbbell and bench and the pull-up bar would be my go-to. Supplements wise, I keep it pretty simple. Vitamin D, I live in the UK, there's no sunshine, so that's pretty essential. Creatine monohydrate. Now, I actually personally don't notice much of an effect, but it's a safe supplement that's considered natural. So I'll take any edge you can get. It's not very expensive. And then the other one is whey protein. Now, I'm happy to have natural sources of protein. Not that whey is not natural, but whole foods. However, I will be struggling some days to hit my protein intake. So whey protein is just a really useful way to top up whatever I haven't managed to get in during the day. This next one's fairly specific, but hopefully it helps someone and it might help you as well. They said, I have arthritis. Are there muscle building leg exercises for people with knee issues? Now, studies have shown that actually strengthening your leg and hips with strength resistance training can actually reduce the pain you feel when you've got arthritis and obviously increase your ability to function. So it's not necessarily going to make you worse by doing strength training. It could actually reduce your pain. And it could also slow the progression of arthritis potentially, especially if you're supporting the joints more. However, I would avoid high impact cardio, probably mainly running. So if you're going to do cardio, something that's very repetitive, I'd probably opt for lower impact like swimming or cycling. With strength training, some good options might be to start doing some TRX assisted deep squats to make sure you're squatting to full depth, getting the quads stretching out so you can benefit from them. And then moving from that onto a cyclist squat. So a cyclist squat is basically a narrow foot, heel elevated goblet squat. Really good for working something called your VMO, which is a quad that stabilizes your kneecap. So cyclist squats, heel elevated, would help you get the depth without leaning forwards. Some other good ones for the hamstrings would be a Swiss ball hamstring curl. These are something you could do at home and just buy a Swiss ball, they're pretty cheap. And single leg glute bridges could be done on a bench or on the floor. You don't need any equipment for those. So if you stick to those kind of 3, a squat based exercise, a hamstring curl and a glute bridge, you've covered your leg muscles with 3 exercises, and that's a good start for you to get going, and that'll help support your knees and hopefully combat or at least slow the progression of your arthritis. This next one's another one related to injuries. Hopefully it'll help some of you. And they've asked, how would you approach training after 5 months off with a lower back injury? So I've struggled with my lower back. I've got compressed discs from doing gymnastics at an early age, and now that they're dehydrated, you can't rehydrate your discs. So I'm always very conscious of this. I'd aim for quality and consistency if you're coming back to training, but not necessarily intensity. So just try and train frequently with high quality and don't try and push it too hard too early. Some really good exercises to start with would be dead bugs, reverse hypers, and wipers. So dead bugs can just be done on the mat. Reverse hypers can be done on a machine or a reverse hyper machine. So I don't like the ones with the back pad that you see, like a techno gym style one. But if you haven't got one of them, you can do it on a plyo box as well. And you can even do it on the arm of your sofa. So just Google reverse hyper and you'll see some demos of that. And then wipers, you could do bent leg or straight leg, and they're a really good one for freeing up your back and starting to work on a bit of core control. I would start each workout with a dynamic mobilization of your back. So I wouldn't necessarily go for static back stretches to start a workout. So you want some movement. So something like cat cows and page turners and some hip mobilization, because that will also help free up any tightness in your back. And then you don't want to just not train hard. So you could just train hard on back supported exercises. So push yourself on things where you're on a machine, or if you've got a bench. So you could do a seated bicep curl, probably as heavy as you like. So it's not that you can't push yourself, but don't push yourself on things like a dumbbell snatch and exercises where your back's going to be compromised. Focus on building a good core foundation on those, but don't ignore the hard training on things where you know your back's going to be fine. Probably a dumbbell bench press, a prone row on a bench. You're going to be fine with all those. So push yourself on that, but be patient when you're coming back to some of those hip hinge movements, maybe some of the more compound lifts like a barbell back squat. Don't rush into them. And we'll finish on this one. Someone asked, how did my calisthenics journey start, and do I do other sports? So I probably started with calisthenics more from having a background doing free running, which is basically just outdoor gymnastics. Now, as part of free running, I learned things like the muscle up, the human flag, and a lot of handstand work, which at that time, those kind of movements were heavily involved in the free running. So I got into it with those, not even thinking of it as calisthenics. It was just movement that looked cool that we could put in the videos. And then I kept that going with my fitness. I always had that ability from learning those whilst I was training, but I actually moved on from that. And then as an adult, I was playing American football. So I was more down the traditional route of doing like compound movements with a barbell and dumbbells. So when I was playing American football, I always was dabbling in calisthenics because I had the ability to do it, but it didn't make up the bulk of my training. I played for about 6.5 years here in the UK for a team that's local to me. And then once I had kids and I decided I'd taken enough hits to the head, I stopped that. And once I'd stopped American football, that's when I started getting back into doing the calisthenics. I was doing more of my YouTube work, and that's partly also why I don't play American football. I can't really afford to get injured. I need to create content in order to support my family, and having a broken leg or arm just is not going to work with having the YouTube side of the business. So I got back into calisthenics then, and then partly because you want to practice what you preach. So because I was teaching calisthenics online, I started to do more. And since then I've been working more on things like a front lever, doing strict ring muscle ups, and I've got back into it post American football. But to be honest, you just needed muscle mass, and I needed to put weight on for American football. And calisthenics, it's best to be a little bit leaner. And that's the Q&A complete. Thanks for all your questions. If you're curious about where I train and where I film the videos, I actually converted this garage that I'm in now into a recording studio and somewhere for me to train. I did a little vlog series about it, so I'll link one of the videos here if you want to check that out now.